evening, everyone, ladies, gentlemen, members. Welcome to our Planning Policy Local Plan Committee meeting held here in the committee room, the Town Hall. We'll go to agenda item 1, apologies and substitution. That's in the hands of Mr. Ian Ford.
Thank you, Chairman. I can report apologies for absence this evening from Councillor Mark Stevenson with no substitution, and also apologies from Councillor Jane Chapman and Councillor Graham Steady substituting for Councillor Chapman this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks so much, thank you. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on 10th of February. Councillor Cousins.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether there are going to be any changes, and I'm quite happy to move them, but I just wanted to make comment on the quality of the minutes that we have. They're not too long, they're not too short, but they do give you a really good introduction to the next meeting. And we do see it somewhere else on the Tendring Colchester Borders Committee as well, very similar minutes, but I think these are a really good start. So as well as moving them, I'd quite happily like to say that they are a really good introduction to the next meeting.
The Truelaker then.
I'll just extend my grateful thanks to Councillor Cossins there. I kind of feel a bit like Goldilocks now that the porridge was just right.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 3 is declaration of interest. Has any member got anything to declare on any items on the agenda? That's no, thank you very much. Agenda item 4, question and notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38. I don't believe we have any, Ian?
That's correct, Chairman. None received.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 5 is public speaking. I've not been made aware of any members or any public who want to speak, but is that the case?
That's the case, Chairman, yes. No one's ready to speak on this occasion.
Thank you very much indeed. So we go to agenda item 6, A1, local plan review, issue and option consultation update. This report will be presented by Paul Woods, who will talk us through the matters raised by town and parish councils, technical stakeholders, businesses, landowners, developers and members of the public, while the opportunity to do so through the 4 exhibitions staged by your team in Harwich, Bruntsea, Lawford and Walton. There are 3 recommendations to agree on page 18, which Paul will go through at the end of the presentation. So with you, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors. As the Chairman explained, the first report this evening provides members with an overview of some of the feedback we received during the recently completed Issues and Options consultation and the Call for Sites exercise. Following the decision of the committee on the 10th of February, the Issues and Options consultation was held between the 3rd of March and the 14th of April 2025. And as set out in the report in February, the primary way for members of the public and other stakeholders to engage with the consultation was online through the Council's Planning Policy Consultation Portal. The portal, which is designed specifically for local plan consultations, is used by a large number of local authorities, and in particular our neighbouring authorities in Colchester and Baber and Mid-Suffolk. And that means that operating the website is familiar to a lot of the people who deal with us through the local plan review, and it's set up to be compliant with the way the planning inspector will expect to receive comments and responses to subsequent consultations as we approach the examination of the local plan. But the documents were also made available on paper. Reference copies were available at the public events that we held, as well as at the town hall and all the public libraries in the district. And they were accompanied by paper response forms. But respondents were generally encouraged to use the website to submit their comments if they were able to. Officers from the planning department hosted 4 public exhibitions in community venues. These events were an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions, specifically about the consultation document and the issues raised in it, as well as look at some large-scale versions of the options maps and posters which summarised each of the consultation chapters. The events were well attended, and officers were able to have extended conversations with many of the people who came along. All the attendees were handed a business card as they left with details of contact details for the planning policy team, as well as the website address and a QR code linking back to the consultation portal. But it was important to ensure that people who couldn't attend the events weren't disadvantaged in any way. And so the consultation documents, the online portal, had contact details for the planning policy team. So members of the public could phone or email officers at their convenience to ask questions or discuss the issues raised through the consultation as well. A number of people phoned for support with the online website, and those who chose not to use the online portal were encouraged to submit their comments by email or in writing by post as well. And so we tried to make the consultation as accessible as we could do to as many groups of people as possible. Publicising these kind of consultations is always a challenge, but we've been really well supported this time round, both by the Council's own communications team, who helped draft press releases that led to articles in all of our local papers and local news websites, and they posted regular reminders about the consultation events on our social media channels, but also by parish and town councils, who were all provided with images and posters that they could use to raise awareness locally of the consultation as well. One particular Facebook post at the start of the consultation was shared over 100 times into different local interest groups and on parish and town council pages, and so that means it will have been seen by thousands more people across the district. As usual, we wrote to everyone who's registered on our consultation database, along with all the statutory consultees and neighbouring authorities, and all of this was reflected in the strong attendance that we had at the public exhibitions. Part of the Council's evidence base for the local plan will be a consultation statement, and that's an evolving document at this stage, but it will demonstrate how we've complied with our Statement of Community Involvement, the SCI, which was agreed by the committee last year. And so turning to the responses that we received, we looked first at the town and parish councils. Both in the lead up to and during the consultation, officers have been conducting focused consultations with parish and town councils. Every local council was given the opportunity to meet with officers to discuss the local plan review and how it might affect their specific part of the district. Some chose to meet in person, others met online, and a couple chose to host their own public meetings, which helped raise awareness of the consultation as well. We were able to discuss the impact of the latest government housing targets for the district and begin to develop an understanding of which area of their parish local councillors might consider to be the most appropriate for future growth. Not all of the parish and town councils submitted a formal response to the consultation, but the insights that they were able to share during those individual meetings has been really valuable. One of the key concerns that was raised by town and parish councils was the importance of protecting strategic green gaps. The impact of our new, much higher housing target on the character of individual settlements was a worry expressed through written comments and at our meetings with the local councils. And it reflects the commitment made by the committee in December 2023 to protect strategic green gaps as one of the guiding principles of the local plan review. Infrastructure was also a key concern. It was by far the most common concern raised through the consultation as a whole, not just by the councils, but also by members of the public and infrastructure providers themselves. There'll be a bit more information about transport infrastructure in the next agenda item, but suffice it to say that concerns around the impact of new development on traffic and road capacity is a major consideration through the local plan review process. Officers have been working very closely with Essex Highways and their technical consultants to form a better understanding and begin planning for the appropriate upgrades, mitigations and new infrastructure that will be necessary to accompany new development. That work is looking closely at the areas identified for growth through the strategy options that we presented in the consultation, and specific concerns raised by certain parish and town councils have been fed back to our consultants through our meetings with them to make sure that they're aware of that local knowledge and expertise. But it wasn't just roads. Healthcare, education, water capacity have all been raised during our engagement with the parishes, and officers have been working with the relevant infrastructure providers over the past 18 months, making them aware of the challenging housing targets we're facing, as well as the areas that are most likely to see population growth over the coming decades. It's been important to make it clear that TDC don't deliver much of this infrastructure ourselves, and so this early engagement is crucial to ensure that those bodies and organisations that are responsible for delivering schools, healthcare, utilities are all able to begin planning now to ensure that infrastructure is provided in the right place and at the right time to accompany new development. The idea of garden villages was supported by a number of the town and parish councils because of the opportunity to deliver the required infrastructure in a comprehensive and coherent way, rather than smaller piecemeal developments. But there was also concerns raised by those councils who are closest to the suggested locations for these new communities, because the phased delivery of infrastructure and facilities could put additional pressure on the existing services in nearby towns and villages in the short term. And that's been really helpful feedback, and it will feed into the work that takes place over the coming months as these proposals are progressed and further evidence is prepared. Understandably, most of the comments received by parish and town councils focused on development in their parts of the district, with those in the west of the district raising concerns about garden villages on the A120, and those in the east of the district more concerned about development at Thorpe and Wheeley. And that's why the meetings with the individual councils were so beneficial, because officers were able to explain in greater detail the sheer scale of the new housing target for the district and the unavoidable fact that nowhere is going to be completely unaffected. The councillors we spoke to understood that, and although they weren't generally happy about the housing numbers, they had serious concerns about the practicality of delivering them over such a short period of time. The key message is that local knowledge and detailed concerns are going to be really helpful as we progress the work of the local plan review. And so moving on to our technical stakeholders, we received comments from a number of organisations that we engage with. Some of these are statutory consultees, such as Natural England or the Marine Management Organisation. Others were infrastructure providers, such as National Highways or the NHS. And we received a really thorough response from our colleagues at Essex County Council as well. The response from ECC was particularly useful, and it reflects the ongoing work that we've been doing with colleagues from County over the past 18 months. The comments they submitted in response to the consultation were positive and supportive, and also highlighted key areas that will need to be considered as work progresses. Transport is a key area of responsibility for the County Council, and they're supportive of the approach that we're taking to transport modelling. They placed a key emphasis on sustainable and active travel as part of any new communities, and also on environmental matters such as climate change, biodiversity, local nature recovery, and water management. They made reference to a number of technical studies and strategies that they have produced to support district councils with their local plan preparation. And they suggested that an overarching policy on climate change would be useful in the updated local plan, something that TDC has already been giving consideration to in accordance with the committee's guiding principle about climate change. The importance of protecting and enhancing the natural environment is a theme that was echoed by several other technical stakeholders, with a key focus on energy and water efficiency, renewable energy, and sustainable drainage. The Environment Agency raised the issue of coastal change and sea level rise, while Natural England and the Essex Wildlife Trust emphasise the importance of biodiversity net gain and ensuring that the local plan takes a coherent approach to green and blue infrastructure, that's open spaces and water features such as rivers and wetlands, to support ecology networks. Essex Wildlife Trust specifically called for nature to be placed at the heart of all new development. Water efficiency was raised by Essex County Council and by Anglian Water, and it will be important to ensure that our local plan policy reflects the most up-to-date evidence and requires new homes to meet appropriate standards around water efficiency. This will be informed by our ongoing work with the water cycle study, and both Anglian Water and Affinity Water are being engaged as part of that process. Likewise, capacity for water recycling centres is also being considered as we narrow down the most suitable locations for new development. Health and wellbeing was covered in depth in Essex County Council's response, but was spoken about by several other stakeholders too, such as Sport England and the various NHS responses. This isn't just about providing more doctors or hospital beds, although that's vitally important to support population growth, but also about the way places are designed to support people to make healthy lifestyle choices. So things like good walking and cycling routes are a good example, making it easier for short everyday trips to the shop or for the school run to be made using active travel can have a significant impact on people's health and then therefore reduce demand on health services. And being able to participate in sport or easily access nature can have significant benefits for people's well-being, and design choices made through the planning process can have a big impact on those things. And so over the past year, officers have attended a series of workshops with various health partners and colleagues from Colchester City Council to develop an evidence base around healthy places and begin to update the local plan policies to ensure that they're as effective as they can be. Responses from from technical stakeholders was generally supportive and positive in tone, whereas comments from businesses, landowners and developers were a bit more mixed. Generally, they supported the updated vision for the local plan that the committee agreed last year. One comment in particular focused on the district's housing target, drawing attention to the fact that the number set out in the Issues and Options consultation document will need to be recalculated as the review progresses. And this is correct, and it's something that officers have been keeping under review, but we don't expect the change in our housing target over the coming year to be so significant that it will affect our overall strategy. The inputs to the standard method calculation, which is now mandatory for the council to use to calculate the housing target, change twice a year, usually in March and May. And the council will be expected to keep the housing target under review until the time that the local plan is submitted for examination, at which point the target can be frozen for up to 2 years while the plan's examined. So officers have recalculated the target based on changes made in March and in May. And the figure now is 1,062 homes a year, which is 28 more than we thought it was going to be in December when the new NPPF was published. And it's possible when the inputs change again in March next year, the figure could go up or down slightly, but the variance over the coming year is likely to be covered by any over-allocation of land that would normally be made as part of the local plan process, which is required to allow for flexibility and choice in the market. There was concern from landowners that relying on garden villages is a risky strategy because of the lead-in times involved and the challenge of delivering at this scale. These responses were generally accompanied by proposals for sites in other locations, often on the edge of settlements, but some in more remote locations as well. On the other hand, landowners with sites in the areas suggested for garden villages submitted responses in support of these proposals, demonstrating a commitment to bringing those sites forward for development. However, it was explained through the Issues and Options document that the scale of the housing target for tendering is so great that for any strategy to be successful, it can't rely on just one type of development site. The strategy that makes it into the local plan will need to feature large strategic development sites like garden villages or large-scale growth at Harwich, medium levels of development around smaller towns, and more modest levels of growth around the district's villages as well. And so there's going to be opportunities for all scales of development and different types of house builder, something that's particularly relevant in light of the government's recent announcements in support of small and medium-sized house builders. Some of the respondents objected to the suggestion that certain areas of the district won't be capable of accommodating additional growth, such as Clacton and those villages closest to the garden community. There was a general feeling that the settlement hierarchy will need to be updated to reflect whatever strategy the updated local plan includes, although some suggested that the settlement hierarchy should be completely rewritten, which isn't generally consistent with the guiding principles agreed by the committee 18 months ago. There was a strong view that strategic green gaps should be reviewed as part of this local plan process, which is in stark contrast to the responses received from town and parish councils. The existing evidence around green gaps is relatively up to date, but if we continue to receive strong objections to retaining certain parts of that designation, it may be necessary to review and update that evidence to ensure there's a strong and robust position on green gaps. Concerns around viability, in particular around biodiversity net gain, was a consistent theme from developers. And although we already have good evidence prepared by Essex County Council that 20% biodiversity net gain is viable in Essex, it will be important that this is properly considered through the local plan's own viability study to make sure that all of the policy requirements in the updated local plan are deliverable and won't prevent development coming forward. Engaging with the public is probably the most challenging part of these consultations, and it's a constant topic of discussion across the country about how to encourage more people to engage with the plan-making process. And I think it's become more difficult in the age of social media because people can post their thoughts and concerns in the comments section and then move on rather than submitting them formally. It's been useful for officers to keep an eye on those online discussions. It's helped us develop a greater understanding of local issues and local feelings that way. But of course, when we get to the statutory stages of consultation, we really need people to submit their responses formally in order that the inspector can consider and respond to them through the local plan examination. But attendance at the 4 exhibitions was strong, with almost 350 individuals attending between them. The events felt busy and the atmosphere was generally positive. And so in addition to the 144 individuals who submitted formal responses to the consultation, which amounted to about 1,200 individual comments between them. We have the knowledge and the feedback from those face-to-face conversations that will help guide the next stages of the local plan review. As you'd expect, the biggest concern from members of the public was about infrastructure delivery. And there were specific local observations around school places, traffic problems, difficulties getting doctor's appointments. And a really positive thing about the in-person events was the opportunity to explain the work that officers have been doing with infrastructure providers, engaging with them and ensuring that the right infrastructure can be delivered to support new homes. We were able to explain some of our ongoing work with local NHS colleagues to develop those updated policies around health and wellbeing. We could explain the 10-year school place plan that Essex County Council update annually to reflect changes in our projected housing growth. And we were able to discuss the concerns around traffic in and out of Brightlingsea and through Thorpe High Street and explain the ongoing work around transport evidence there. There was general support from the public for development in larger towns like Harwich, which have existing infrastructure and services, but there were mixed views about garden villages. People shared the concerns around the speed of infrastructure delivery and the impact on nearby services in the short term. And there were specific concerns in Manningtree about traffic around the train station at peak times due to new developments in Lawford and the impact that new developments in or near the town would have. The affordability of new homes was also a big concern with members of the public, and it was useful to be able to explain more to people about the purpose of the strategic housing market assessment, which I'll discuss more in the next report, and also to understand local concerns about the kinds of houses that have been built in recent years and whether they meet local needs. Many people have shared concerns about the impact of large-scale development on the character of the area and the loss of green space, rural nature, natural areas being eroded, concerns about agriculture and food security. There were some mixed views about the suggestion of higher density development, some in favour of prioritising wildlife and taking less land for houses. Others argue that new development should reflect existing density to maintain the character in different parts of the district. There was a strong feeling that if higher density would be proposed, generous amounts of open space should be provided to accompany it. Protecting the environment was a big priority for a lot of people who responded, both local nature and biodiversity, and climate change and carbon efficiency as well. There was general support from the public for introducing higher BNG requirements, although there were some concerns that it would reduce viability for things like affordable housing. The tone of the majority of the responses, and certainly those people who came to the public exhibition, was supportive of what the council's trying to achieve. People seem to understand the challenging nature of the mandatory housing targets and the fact that they're being imposed on the council. They appreciate that the council's approach is to ensure new developments, if they are going to happen, achieve the best possible outcomes for the district. And they want to ensure that their concerns regarding new development, infrastructure, protecting nature are all adequately addressed through the local plan, rather than being left to a planning inspector determining speculative applications. And it's worth noting that I've received a number of comments praising the way that our team here conducted the consultation events and how helpful the planners, the assistant planners and the support staff were in explaining the issues, helping people engage with the consultation and answering their questions. And so finally, moving on to the call for sites, at the beginning of 2024, the council ran a 6-week call for sites consultation, and at that time we received 190 sites, with a further 11 coming in over subsequent months. This year, in light of the much higher housing targets we had to plan for, we formally reopened that call for sites consultation alongside the issues and options, and an additional 142 sites were received, which brings the total to 343 sites that we're considering now. The majority of those sites have been proposed for residential development, although some are for commercial development and environmental uses such as habitat creation. Sites have been submitted in all parts of the district, but there's been a particular focus on the A120 and the A133 corridors and around existing settlements. Some small sites have been proposed in more remote locations, which proposes challenges and are less likely to be sustainable locations for new development. And we've also had some sites submitted within green gaps, which, as we noted earlier, is something the committee's guiding principles seek to maintain. And so that could require evidence around these designations to be updated and made more robust. Some of the sites are on the edge of Clacton, and others are in close proximity to the garden community, both of which are locations that already have significant amounts of growth planned in the medium to long term, and certainly beyond the extended plan period to 2041. But aside from these challenging sites, there have been a significant number of sites in locations that line up with the proposed strategy options in the Issues and Options document. And these sites in particular are being analysed to understand which are the most suitable and the most sustainable locations to consider allocating for housing. Once the analysis of all these sites have been undertaken, the sites can be passed to our consultants, who will begin further work understanding the infrastructure requirements and sustainability of each location. And we expect to bring a full report of the sites submitted and Office's initial conclusions about their sustainability back to the committee for consideration in due course. And on that note, I'll draw your attention to the recommendations which are on page 18 of your agenda. Would you like me to read those, Chair? Yeah. So it is recommended that the Planning Policy and Local Plan Committee A discusses and notes the content of this report, which provides an initial overview of the notable matters raised in responses to the recent Issues and Options consultation exercise and related events. Notes that further and more thorough analysis of the responses is being carried out by officers and that they will be taken into account alongside the emerging evidence base in preparing the preferred options draft local plan for the committee's consideration later in the year. And notes that officers are also in the process of analysing site-specific submissions to the Call for Sites consultation exercise, and that more information on these submissions and their analysis will be reported to the committee in due course. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, for a very comprehensive presentation and summary of what's been submitted. I'll go to members. Any questions, any comments for Paul? Councillor Steady.
Yeah, thanks. That's a real heavyweight report. Thanks very much for that. I can't find anywhere where is the Section 106 agreements, especially for open space and facilities within the towns, is that going to be replaced by the SIL level, the Community Infrastructure Levy?
I don't think it's a bit premature. Paul, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so it's not something that's been covered in this report. Officers have been undertaking the process of preparing a viability assessment to understand whether the Community Infrastructure Levy will or will not be viable within the tendering district. That work is still underway, and so we haven't got the conclusions yet to understand whether SIL will be the most appropriate mechanism for securing those contributions, or whether we continue with Section 106. But that's something that will be reported to the committee once there's further information.
Come back, yep.
I take your point about the local knowledge, and obviously there is lots going on with the Section 106 and the SIL situation as well. So putting more work on yourselves, will there be more exhibitions? Like we've been very successful on the ones you've already had, although I would demand a recount because I think we had more than Lawford in Brighton Sea. But I wonder whether there's anything in the pipeline to have similar presentations, or further, is there any way that using local knowledge, town councils can act as a conduit for their area to be able to have an input into the system as it progresses?
Paul?
Thank you, Councillor Steady. Absolutely. So to pick up your first point around exhibitions, when we get to the next stage of public consultation, which is the preferred option stage, that's the first complete draft of the local plan, that will be published in the same ways as the Issues and Options consultation, but we will also be conducting more exhibitions. And we anticipate that we will need to do more focused exhibitions there, so closest to the areas that are most affected by development proposals. So it could well be we do more than 4 public exhibitions at that stage. But your point around town and parish councils acting as a conduit for that local knowledge is really welcomed. As I mentioned in the presentation, we have been actively engaging with town and parish councils over the past 6 or 9 months, and we're keen for that engagement to continue. Certainly as we begin to have more developed proposals for certain areas of the district, we'd like to run more briefings with those councils. But in the meantime, if more information or there's something that they want to share in addition to what has been shared through the consultation exercise itself, very welcome. I'd welcome them to contact us and arrange meetings in the interim. Thank you.
Councillor Bush.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Mr. Woods. Couple of questions really. It's really relating for the call for sites consultation. You reopened it and now closed. Does that mean it's definitely closed, or there still will be opportunities for sites to be considered from developers? That's the first part of the question. And the second part brings me back onto something that's been looked at for some time. I know the importance of significant sized sites because of infrastructure, health, schools, etc. But on the smaller sites, and I'm going to refer back to the 69 parcels of land that was looked at by the council to do something with them in various sizes, that sort of died. Is a part of this going to be considered as tendering, looking to let, sell, offset, build on some of those sites and contribute towards those numbers? That would be, I'd like to sort of get a feedback on that at this moment. Thank you.
Paul or Gary, which one of you would like to take that?
Thank you, Councillor Bush. I'll address your first question and then hand over to Gary for the second, if that's okay. So regarding the call for sites consultation, when it closed last year, we were sort of very much in a period of limbo because we knew that the new government were going to be announcing changes to the NPPF and new housing targets, but we didn't have clarity around that. And so we were really happy to receive sites as they were made available to us. So developers would contact us and say, am I too late? Have I missed the boat? And we were very happy to receive those sites over the course of that year. We're at the stage now where we're beginning to commission technical studies, and we're going to be passing sites and suggested strategies over to our consultants to begin running models and testing and to develop evidence. And so it becomes harder to add new sites into that process. That's not to say the door is completely closed. And so if a developer were to contact us and the site looks like it would tally up with the council's preferred strategy and is something we would want to consider, then the door isn't completely closed, but it is just more challenging at this stage in the process to continue accepting new sites. And actually the number that we received through the second call for sites consultation was really encouraging. I think that the industry perhaps was really motivated by the government's new housing targets and planning reform. And so I think most of the sites that we would have expected to receive, we have seen now. So we've not got any real concerns that there are big sites missing. But if developers were to come forward over the sort of coming months, then we'd be happy to speak to them still and explore whether that's a possibility.
Do you want to come back on that?
No, it's fine.
Thank you. Gary, do you want to pick up the second part?
Thank you. No, thank you, Councillor Bush. So smaller sites, there is an expectation through national policy that smaller sites make a big contribution towards housing delivery. Further encouragement through recent announcements about bringing smaller sites forward. In terms of what goes in the local plan, normally we have a threshold, so we'd only specifically show sites above a certain size. At the moment, I think it's 10 or more is shown as a specific allocation, and an allowance made within the figures for smaller sites that could contribute towards housing growth. In terms of what the council's decisions are going forward about areas of land that it controls and within its ownership, I mean, that's going to be a matter going forward for the Cabinet's consideration in reviewing the assets that the council holds. But of course, anything that is designated for any particular purpose, either within the local plan or marketed for a particular use, will take into account some of the planning considerations. And there's a very close relationship between the planners and our colleagues in the assets team to understand what the restrictions might be, what the potential of certain sites might be, but for a separate process involving the Cabinet.
Come back.
If I may, so it's not off the table in terms of potential development on those sites. I know it's not part of what you said is local plan, it's a smaller number. And while just on that particular theme, we've covered like the strategic gaps, the concerns, particularly for rural parishes, to have that gap. I also have, and I've mentioned before to you, Mr. Griver, regarding coastal protection and how that sits in protecting that, particularly around the Amphel water and in that area. How does that fit into the evaluation of consideration of land now? Thank you.
Gary or Paul? Gary, take that.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, good questions. I mean, Mr. Woods touched on strategic green gaps and there being a strong principle around trying to maintain those. A lot of evidence was produced as part of the last local plan review to justify the retention of those and the continued protection. And we'll look to refresh and look at that evidence again going forward, because we know that's going to be an area of challenge where and landowners will want to see to test the boundaries of those green gap designations. Coastal protection belt is a slightly different thing, because that's more about protection of the visual landscape affecting the coastal slopes around the district. And that designation originates from 1984, when Essex County Council designated it as part of its subject plan. And over the years it's been amended and reviewed. It's a lesser designation in terms of its national importance. It is very much a local designation. We will be looking at that, and if site proposals come forward that are affecting that coastal protection belt notation, I think we'll seriously have to look at what the landscape impact would be of those. It's not to say that we would flat protect every inch of the countryside that is affected by that designation, but it was designated for a reason, and that was to protect the visual amenity of the coastal slopes. So in any thoughts or any decisions about any sites to go in the local plan, that landscape impact would be the key consideration in those locations.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on from Councillor Bush about the call for sites, 343 across the district, and it's predominantly in the A120, A133 corridor. I'd be interested to know whether significant big sites that have been identified, have come across or they've approached you with close proximity to the A120, the A133, what provision for improvements of those said roads, and maybe in predominantly new junctions, roundabouts to go on to the pieces of the land that neighbour the A120, A133. That's one question. And my second question is on page 32, with reference to detailed infrastructure delivery plan for existing schools to be expanded. New schools were provided at the right time. As you know, in the west of the district, in particular Elmstead Market, they've had a 56% increase, and in my patch of Alresford, 44% increase. But school places are really difficult to get into local primary schools. In fact, there were 20 families in my patch that couldn't get a school in the village, and they were told they had to go elsewhere. As the crow flies, it was fingering hoe across the water, which is unrealistic. It would have been a 20 minutes to half-hour trip there and back during rush hour and day. So I'd be interested to know the detailed delivery plan on schools, but I understand a lot of our schools in the west of the district don't have no plans for expansion. They've got no means to expand. How would that be overcome? Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you, Councillor Scott. So to pick up your first point around development along the A120 and the A133, as we highlight in the second report this evening, transport and highways considerations are a key part of the local plan review, and we've been working from very early stages with colleagues at Essex Highways and their technical consultants to establish the approach we're going to take to highways modelling, and then the sort of the mitigation, the highways improvements, new infrastructure that will be required to accommodate and to support growth. The work that we've been doing already has looked at the 4 options that were consulted on in the issues and options document, and they focus particularly on garden village proposals at Hare Green, at Horsley Cross, at Wheeley, and potentially at Thorpe. And the impact of that scale of growth has already been being considered by Essex Highways to understand, firstly, what mitigations can be put in place to support and encourage sustainable transport, and so looking at sort of internalisation of trips, improved public transport, providing opportunities for active travel. But that doesn't detract from the importance of looking at what highways upgrades and improvements are also going to be needed. We're realistic about the fact that a lot of people will still choose to drive their cars even if there is good public transport available or there is active travel available. And so the modelling needs to reflect that. And so it can't be pie in the sky thinking that everybody's going to get on the bus for all of their journeys. So it's a two-pronged approach really to make sure that any new developments that we propose through the local plan are as sustainable as they can be, but also to ensure that the appropriate mitigations and the highways infrastructure upgrades accompany that. And so I've not got any specific details about upgrades at this junction or that kind of thing at this stage, but it's work that's ongoing, and as we move further on with the analysis of the call for site submissions, we'll be able to provide those specific site details to our consultants who can then develop the modelling, get more specific, more detailed outputs around that. School places is a tricky one. It's dealt with by Essex County Council, and they've got a really good team there that update their school place plan every year. And the information that forms part of our SHLA that is reported to the committee annually, where we project how many homes are going to be delivered in each part of the district across the next 15 years. That information feeds in to Essex County Council school place plan, so they can update that annually. It's difficult to have exact figures about what demand will be because children start school at 5 years old, so you can only predict, you know, what babies have been born this year, what places are definitely going to be needed in 5 years' time, and so that's challenging. But with regards to our infrastructure delivery plan, when that piece of work is progressed onto the next stages, the consultants will be speaking to a lot of different infrastructure providers, but in particular Essex County Council and their school places team, to understand the impact of additional housing growth in specific settlements. So you sort of spoke about concerns in Alresford. The number of new homes that we settle on for allocation of the local plan in Alresford will be fed to colleagues at Essex County Council. They can look at their school place plan for the coming 10 years and identify what upgrades or new infrastructure or services will be required there. So again, at this stage, there may not be plans to upgrade particular primary schools or additional places of secondary schools, but that plan at Essex is updated annually, and so the growth plans that we as the district begin to develop will inform their plans, and their capacity will inform our plans, and it's very much a two-way conversation on that front.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. A really good response there. Thank you for the answers. The one final comment is I've read through this, and I don't know whether it's in this report or another one, in terms of small-scale developments for elderly population who wish to downsize their homes to one-bedroom apartments. I know in my part of the world, in the west of the district, that there is a lot of elderly people who wish to stay in the community where their friends and social networks are, but they want to downsize their houses, say from a 4-bed to a 1-bed apartment like they have in Elmsted Market. I was wondering whether any provision for that going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
I think you might be covering that in the next report, Paul, will you? Or do you want to answer that now? Yeah.
Yeah, I can pick that up in part of the next report.
Yeah, you all right with that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a question I really want to ask is regarding the social housing. It's a concern for everybody, affordable social housing, the quantity, and how that's integrated with the housing policy of tendering. And the reason I'm raising that, because I have a few issues about consistency of the housing policy, social housing policy. I've seen developments that have had sort of 60 properties and have been gifted 5 from the developer. And I've had the same development, similar number, and the demand was for 30%, 28, which made that development financially unviable. But it was already given approval. And I'm seeing that happening, and I just need to know where the consistency is, because for the public looking in, this is just not good. This is not good at all. And I don't know if it's in the housing department or it's in planning or the pair, both of these departments. But for me, I'm anxious about that, what I'm experiencing. So I'd like some clarification on where we're going with that policy and that's going to fit in to the local plan going forward. Thank you.
Again, that's probably more on the next report, but Gary, do you want to, your comments?
No, thank you, Councillor Bush. And yeah, and I'm aware of some of the instances where it would be perceived that there may have been inconsistent approaches between different developments in approach. So the local plan policy as it stands at the moment, 30% requirement on larger sites for development on site. That's something that will be reviewed as part of the local plan review, and the strategic housing market assessment, which Paul will speak about as part of the second report, is a key piece of evidence that will not only inform our planning policy for the local plan, but also the council's corporate housing strategy on delivering affordable provision. We had a period of time a few years back where it was not possible to achieve 30% on site. The way that funding mechanisms changed meant that a lot of registered providers found themselves in the position where they weren't able to access the funds to be able to acquire 30% or any percentage on a development. And the council went through a period of time where, in lieu of 30%, there would be a lower number of units on a gifted basis, which could either go into sort of local housing trust or to a registered provider or into the council's own stock. That approach got us through a period of time, but doesn't get you anywhere the numbers that we would need. And therefore the housing strategy was sort of tightened up around returning to a straight back 30% requirement. We've got the opportunity through this local plan to see where there needs to be any flexibility in policy to allow different approaches. And I think there are going to be announcements from government around different ways of delivering affordable housing, which will feed into this as well. And I think what we found is that in recent times there's been different examples where certain sites we've required the percentage requirement from the local plan. On other sites there may have been history or planning history where an earlier consent was granted under a sort of gifted unit arrangement, and that's sort of been carried forward into subsequent applications. But no, consistency is important, and making sure what the policy in the local plan ties up with the policy in the housing strategy of the council is important, and the market assessment, which Mr. Woods will speak about later, is a key ingredient in making that happen.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mr. Guyver. And the reason why this is recent development, I've got comparisons, and on the basis of that, if I was a developer on the outside looking in, I would see that as some prejudicial decision change, and because of the developments were almost identical. So, but anyway, that's where that is, and I'm glad it's going to be reviewed and integrated, because you just think it's been unfair.
I think I would like to, as the Housing Trust has been mentioned, I think I better declare an interest that I'm a director of the Law for the Housing Trust. It's just a code interest, not conflict or pecuniary. It's just a code interest on that. I'd like to be registered. Thank you very much, Ian. Any more questions, members? I will go to Councillor Baker, who's been sitting there listening to the conversation. What's your thoughts, Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Chairman. As always, an excellent presentation from Mr. Woods. I think it covered it very, very well. Your questions asked, very pertinent, but I've got no further comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Baker. Okay, so we've got a recommendation on page 18, as Paul went through. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Cousin, Councillor Scott, second. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Ian, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Paul, for the presentation. The next report is A2, agenda item 7, evidence base and next steps. This report will also be presented by Paul, and will give us an update on the technical evidence, which has been concentrated on 3 very important areas. As we already discussed, the strategic housing market assessment, known as SHMART, which is on page 39, includes details of affordability, general and affordable housing needs, types and tenure of housing, demographics, requirements, specific group of residents, and all the important concluding summary of what's required to make the necessary provision for the next 17 years. On page 40, there's employment land review, and on page 42, the transport modelling, which you already kind of alluded to. And there's only one recommendation, which is on page 36. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report builds on the information that was presented at February's meeting of the Planning Policy and Local Plan Committee, which set out an overview of the evidence that's being prepared as part of the updated local development scheme. This report doesn't seek to repeat that information, but rather to provide a bit more detail about 3 pieces of evidence that are emerging now. So the first document that the report looks at is the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, which we call the SHMAR. It's been produced by HDH Planning and Development, who are the same consultants who supported us during the preparation of the adopted local plan. The purpose of the SHMAR is to analyse the housing need locally, going beyond the government's mandatory housing target and breaking it down into different sizes and types and tenures of homes. This work will inform the local plan's approach to policies such as LP5, affordable housing, and it will also assist in determining planning applications, because policy LP2 of the adopted plan requires developments of 11 or more dwellings to have a mix of dwelling size, type and tenure that broadly reflects the housing need identified in the latest SHMAR. This piece of work started before the government had confirmed its approach to housing targets in December last year, and so the initial stages were undertaken based on the standard method calculation at that time. But once the housing target was confirmed, the findings could be expanded to reflect the higher housing target. That means we have a robust methodology that reflects the most up-to-date position. As noted earlier, the housing target will change throughout the course of the local plan review, and it might be necessary for a brief addendum to be added to the study at the time that we submit the local plan for examination to confirm that the findings are still relevant to any updated housing targets. So the findings from this report, the district's population is expected to grow significantly between now and 2041, with the biggest increase in the older population, those aged 65 and over, which will increase by 43.6%, compared with just 11.5% for the working age population. Tendring has more people who own their own house without a mortgage than other parts of the country, which might reflect the high proportion of retired people who live in the district. Although interestingly, the private rented sector has grown significantly over the past 15 years, with a 23.4% increase between 2011 and 2021 between the 2 census dates. House prices in Tendring are generally lower than the regional averages, but despite that, affordability remains a real issue due to lower incomes in the local area. The SHMAR sets out the need for different types and tenures of housing, and in Chapter 5, using the long-term balancing housing markets model, it indicates that 14.6% of the overall housing growth should be affordable rented or social rented, and the majority of that category should be social rented, because that's the accommodation that would be most appropriate to the majority of households in that sector. 7.3% of the home should be affordable home ownership, such as shared ownership or first homes. And this is useful to help us understand which kinds of affordable housing are most needed within the district, and it will be used by colleagues in the housing department as they develop and update the council's housing strategy. Using a separate model, which is set out in Chapter 6 of the SHMAR, the total need for affordable homes in Tendring is calculated at 275 a year, which represents just over a quarter, 26.6% of the overall housing target. The report suggests that the requirement for large sites to deliver 30% affordable housing seems plausible, subject to viability testing that will take place through the local plan review process. Chapter 7 is what considers the housing requirement of particular groups of the population, so looking at retirement accommodation, looked after children, those sort of different kinds of specialist accommodation. There's a projected need for 2,805 additional units of sheltered housing for older people and retirement housing, and 765 additional extra care units and supported living housing by 2041. Through the call for sites process, developers have indicated the kind of developments that they may look to provide on various sites around the district, and that's something that we will be considering as we analyse those sites. But I'd also refer back to the policy in the local plan that requires all large-scale housing developments to reflect the housing need identified in the most up-to-date SHMAR. And so from this evening, the up-to-date SHMAR has been published now. It's in the public domain. It's a material consideration for planning applications. And so for larger scale planning applications that come forward now, even before the updated local plan comes forward, we'll need to take account of the needs of different households and different groups within our communities. That said, if there are specific sites that come forward through the local plan review process for those specialist kind of housing, then that's something we would look at and make sure that we have policies in place to support the delivery of those and to protect them if that were to be the case. There's also an additional need for 425 registered care spaces, that's nursing and residential care homes. And the SHMAR identifies a need for almost 9,500 accessible and adaptable homes, which is Building Regulations M42 Category 2. And about 1,500 homes that need to be suitable for wheelchair users immediately. Moving on now to the Employment Land Review. That's the second study that the report provides an update on. This piece of evidence isn't complete yet, but we have received an overview of the initial findings. And there's going to be some engagement with key stakeholders over the next couple of months before the report is finalised. But the initial outcome does help as we develop a strategy for the updated local plan. The projected need for employment land isn't an exact science. There are many different factors that impact market demand and the interest of investors in different areas of the country. So in order to draw robust conclusions for our evidence base, the study looks at 4 different scenarios or predictions of what requirement there might be over the extended local plan period. An employment-led scenario, which is based on specialist forecasts produced by Cambridge Econometrics, expects employment in the district to be increased by about 4,500 jobs over the plan period to 2041, with the greatest demand for industrial and warehousing units. In total, this scenario would lead to 5.36 hectares of additional employment land being needed. The second scenario is called higher growth, and that takes account of the strategies and policies that are already in place and may result in an improved demand across the district. So it looks at things like Freeport East, for example, and the opportunities around that status. It looks at local priority sectors, existing planned developments and infrastructure changes. And in that higher growth scenario, 30.69 hectares of land would be required. The third scenario looks at past take-up. So it looks at the amount of employment floor space delivered over the past couple of decades. And extending this trend forward, we're looking at about 17.01 hectares of employment land across the plan period. And finally, the labour supply approach looks at the effect of population change based on the new housing targets for tendering on the demand for employment land. So the consultants who prepared the SHMAR were able to pass on data to our employment land consultants very early on in the process to inform this model. And in that scenario, 17.02 hectares would be required. And so as you can see from those scenarios, there's quite a range, some clearly representing a more ambitious approach to economic growth than others, with 2 of the scenarios set broadly in the middle. The analysis makes it clear that focusing on the first scenario with the lowest demand would be unduly pessimistic, and it wouldn't meet the needs of development associated with Freeport East and with the garden community. In reality, we already have a supply of 59 hectares of employment land through existing planning permissions and local plan allocations. So in purely quantitative terms, there's no need to allocate additional employment land. However, what the emerging report does find is that there's a clear need to focus not just on the quantity of land, but also on the quality of land. That is to say, is it in the right place? Is it the right type of development to meet the needs and the future needs of different sectors? The consultants have identified strong interest in land around the major road network, for example, and there would be sense in considering additional allocations around the A120 and the A133 corridors. The local plan can afford to be ambitious in allocating additional land to facilitate investment, particularly in response to fairly low vacancy levels in both office and industrial markets in the district. As I mentioned, the consultants will be engaging with key stakeholders such as businesses, landowners and developers to test these initial findings of the study before it will be published alongside the next stage of public consultation for the local plan review. It will also be available then to support the wider economic growth work being undertaken across the council. And finally, the transport modelling work. It's been a really important focus for local plan review to make sure that we properly understand and mitigate the impact of new development on the road network. And this is even more important now because of the sheer number of new homes we're going to need to accommodate. Updates to the NPPF in December means that there's now a much greater emphasis on sustainable transport for new developments, and the consultants working on this evidence have ensured that the approach they've taken complies with national policy so that it makes a robust evidence base for the local plan review. So, as well as identifying the impact of new houses on traffic congestion and identifying what road upgrades may be required, it will also look at opportunities to encourage the use of public transport and active travel, and also consider how new developments like the garden villages proposed through the Issues and Options consultation might be able to internalise some of those everyday trips that might otherwise impact the highway network. So these could be things like improved walking and cycling routes, new rapid transit connections like at the garden community, and building a sufficient scale that could deliver infrastructure and services such as shops, schools and healthcare within those new garden villages. So for example, if a new garden village was able to deliver a secondary school, that would represent hundreds of daily trips made within the community, maybe even by foot or by bike, rather than people having to drive to schools elsewhere in the district. The initial document that we received takes a high-level assessment of the proposed growth locations that we've identified in the Issues and Options document, and it assesses the likely impacts on the existing transport network, identifies any initial mitigations that could be delivered alongside new developments. It doesn't make any recommendations about which of those 4 strategies we consulted on the council should choose, but instead it highlights the strengths and the challenges associated with the development in 10 different areas of the district. So just very briefly, those 10 areas are the A120 corridor, where there's the proposed development of a garden village at Horsley Cross, which would require significant investment in public transport and active travel infrastructure. They suggest maybe a high-frequency bus route or connection with Manningtree, Colchester and Harwich would be the linchpin, with supporting measures to increase its effectiveness. They suggest employment locations seem sensible there, given proximity to the A120, Freeport and Colchester, although considerations around staff access to the sites will be important. Around Ardley and the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden community, the success there, it hinges on addressing existing highway constraints and providing significantly improved public transport and active travel options. And they suggest that further development in this location, such as employment sites to the north of the A120, seems sensible, particularly once the garden community has been established, ensuring that sustainable transport connectivity to the site is in place and it's accessible. Along the B1414 corridor, which runs between Little Clacton and Great Oakley, there was the proposal in some of our options for a garden village scale development at Thorpe, and they see that's got strong opportunities for sustainable access to existing services in Thorpe-le-Soken village and the railway station, and it offers a centre for amenities and for other small settlements in the area, but they realise this potential depends on effectively addressing the transportation challenges, integrating public transport, prioritising active travel and addressing congestion through the village itself and on the A133. Brightlingsea, there are a number of transport related issues identified there, in particular the capacity on the single road in and out of the town and the junction at Thorrington Cross. They think the targeted improvements at these congestion points are needed, but although it will be a constraint for new development in Brightlingsea, the scale that we propose through the Issues and Options document are unlikely to have a significant effect on that road and that junction. Improving active travel in the town centre and public transport development will be good mitigations for both this development but also for existing trip movements in Brightlingsea. Harwich and Dovercourt would require a multifaceted approach to transport improvements, focusing on highway upgrades, public transport and active travel. Funding for public transport and active travel improvements is a recurring challenge, and so it's going to require strategic planning and collaboration, which I think we understand already. Clacton and Jaywick, where we're not currently proposing any additional developments, but an assessment of the baseline and the impact of committed developments was undertaken there to ensure that the impact of any developments that are already coming forward in Clacton, their impact on the A133 is fully considered as part of the modelling work. Manningtree, Lawford and Mistley, Development there hinges on reducing reliance on short-distance car trips, and so it will require a combined approach of improving public transport, possibly with new bus routes, prioritising active travel, and addressing the existing highways capacity issues. St Osyth and Point Clear, the size of development there is unlikely to generate a significant amount of additional trips, which will impact the highway network, but public transport and active travel improvements again will support the reduction in short trips. The Sunshine Coastline Corridor, so that's the railway line between Colchester and Thorpe, those developments rely heavily on highway works of freighting and wheelie roundabouts, which will mitigate highways issues from increased demand, but also through construction traffic. The proposal for a garden village at Wheelie appears to offer a sustainable location for larger scale development because of its multimodal access. It's got proximity to the railway station. Development at Wheelie and at Freighting Hare Green, they should be coordinated in order to maximise the benefits of shared infrastructure. And then at Frinton and Walton, the modelling so far suggests that development of the size we're proposing is unlikely to have a significant effect on the current network, but there are going to be key opportunities to improve access to rail from each development site and into the towns. But we noted earlier on in the evening about the concerns around Thorpe High Street and any development to the east of Thorpe, and so we're going to need to make sure that the modelling work as it progresses is able to assess the impact accurately through that part of the district. Something that we touched on in the previous report was the fact that the highways modelling doesn't always pick up those local issues that we know about, particularly in Thorpe and Brightlingsea. There's significant concerns in both those areas. The length of delays in those areas might not show up in the technical models, but the impact of new development in those locations is something that we will need to consider very closely and ensure the appropriate improvements and mitigations are planned for. The next stage of this work is to provide the consultants with details of the sites that have been submitted to us and the potential numbers of new homes on those specific locations, and that will enable them to undertake the more detailed modelling of the cumulative impacts of this new growth across the district, and then identify the most suitable approach to sustainable travel and mitigating impacts on the highway network. And we hope that that work will be underway in the coming weeks. And so the next steps overall for the local plan review are to begin working towards the first full draft of the local plan, which we call the preferred options. This will include draft policies, draft allocations for housing and employment development, and other designations such as green gaps, coastal protection belt, etc. Work is ongoing to read and analyse all of the comments that we received through the issues and options consultation, and the response to those comments will set out how they've been considered in preparing the draft local plan. The full analysis will be part of the evidence base at the next stage of consultation, and it will demonstrate the meaningful impact that responses to consultation can have on the local plan process. And alongside this work, further technical studies are also progressing to make sure that the updated local plan is supported by the most robust and up-to-date evidence base. And a lot of these work streams were explained in the report in February. As this work progresses, more detailed engagement with technical stakeholders and infrastructure providers will continue, and we'll provide further updates to members of the committee as that work emerges. And so to the recommendation, which can be found on page 36 of your agenda. It's recommended that the Planning Policy and Local Plan Committee notes the contents of this report and the progress made on updating the local plan evidence base to date. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Paul, for another very comprehensive presentation. I'll go to members. Any comments, questions from members? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, a very good report, Mr. Woods. On page 42, you've got the transport modelling, and I know you've been consulting with people and organisations. Does that come under the bus companies? Because at the moment they're doing their own consultation, I believe, in the rural communities where bus services have been reduced. Residents have contacted me with reference to reduction. You can get out of the villages, either going to Colchester or Clacton, but coming back is another matter. So you can leave the village or communities, but you can't get back to the said community where they started from. So there's a problem there. You also mentioned the Thornton Cross. Yes, I'm very pleased you've put that, because I'm sure Councillor Steady mentioned about Brightsea, one way in, one way out in Brightsea, but in terms of Thornton Cross, A lot of people do turn and use that route. It's the route of the B1027. I would have thought the B1027 would have been in here. I know you've got the A120 and the A133, but the B1027 from the University of Essex all the way to St John's Roundabout in Clacton, that's a major southern route into our district, going from Clacton and Colston and backwards and forwards, and turning to St Osiph and the villages off. 22,000 vehicle movements a day on the B1027, and I'm told from Essex Highways that it increases by 10% every year. And I know Essex County Council are doing a lot of works on that B1027 because of that. You mentioned about links with Wheeley and Thorpe have close links to freighting. I would argue that freighting is probably nearer to Great Bromley, Elmsted and Thorrington more so than Wheeley than Thorpe. Geographically, freighting is nearer to those communities than Wheeley and Thorpe. And as you know, I'm pleased you mentioned about the freighting roundabout. That is gridlocked early in the morning and late in the evening. And a lot of residents who come from Bentley, who want to leave Great Bentley, trying to get onto the A133 is problematic, turning left or right there. So I would like to see Essex County Council maybe to do some improvements along that stretch, so residents in, say, Ravens Green, Freighting, Bentley, that can get on and off that road instead of going through the rural communities and causing problems. You mentioned about improvements of railways, Great Bentley station. I know it can be chocker around Great Bentley, people parking on the green there, and I know there's a campaign going on in Great Bentley with reference from Great Bentley Parish Council to improve the traffic and safety management in Great Bentley, which then have an effect on people that park there to use the train in Great Bentley. I welcome all the rest of the items in the report. My previous question in the previous item about social housing for residents who want to downsize, I think that's key. We have a high number of elderly residents who live in our district who wish to remain in our district where their networks and social networks are, and I know that's the common thing I get asked in my part of the world. Can we have small scale developments like they have in Elmsted Market and St Osiph where residents can downsize? It free up 4-bed houses for younger families to move in, while elderly people can downsize and go into smaller accommodation. I welcome what you said about the SHMA. Is it SHMA? I welcome that, and I think the report overall is really, really good. Thank you.
Do you get all the questions there, Paul?
I think I did. Thank you, Councillor Scott. If I do miss anything, please let me know. So firstly, you asked about engagement with bus companies. The work hasn't engaged directly with bus companies at this stage, but the draft report that we've seen has got quite a thorough analysis of bus connectivity across the district at the moment to understand what that baseline is, where there are issues, where there are gaps in provision, and to identify where some of the development proposals we're looking at for the local plan might be able to contribute to improving those. Essex County Council are in the process of developing a bus strategy that will affect the Tendring district, and obviously because Essex County Council are heavily involved with our transport modelling, that thinking is very much joined up, and so the same consultants will be aware of that strategy that's being developed and the implications for some of our future development. So although at the moment there's not any specific commitments to a new bus route between A and B, those are things that are being considered in light of new development locations, particularly for the larger scale developments, be they garden villages or in some of the larger towns. Thorrington Cross is an issue that was raised a lot through our public consultation, and it's something that is acknowledged through the highways modelling at the moment. The understanding is that there is capacity on that road for the levels of development that we were considering through our issues and options document. But as I mentioned, we know that some of the local experiences don't always line up with what the technical modelling says. And that could be because traffic doesn't necessarily come to a complete standstill, but is moving. And so that affects the delay times or the way it shows up in the modelling. We know that at different times of year as well, particularly in the summer months when we have visitors to the district, those problems are exacerbated. And a lot of the modelling takes place at average times of year rather than trying to find those explicit peaks. But it's something that we're acutely aware of, particularly at Brightlingsea up to Thorrington Cross, and particularly through Thorpe Oaken. And so it's something that we're keeping under review. And although the sort of the technical evidence may or may not highlight issues there, your officers are very much aware of those issues and their considerations as we try to identify the most suitable sites for new development, but also what mitigations can be put in place around transport. The B1027 is not necessarily a road that I mentioned explicitly in my report, but that part of the district has been considered through the highways modelling. The way the model has worked so far is to look at those different zones, those 10 different areas across the district where development has been sort of grouped together. And so sort of the corridor between Harwich and Clacton, for example, the A120 corridor, that area in the sort of the western part of the district, and particularly the southwestern part, around Alresford and then towards the garden community, that's being looked at as a whole, so looking at Alresford, at Brightlingsea, at Thorrington. But of course, we're not proposing any additional development around Elmstead at the moment and up towards the university. But it is being considered, and it has been picked up through the modelling work. I just didn't mention the actual designation of that particular road. The idea of linking Wheelie, Thorpe and Freighting, that's not based on the geography, how physically close Freighting and the Bromleys may be, how close Freighting may be to Wheelie or to Thorpe, but looking from a strategic point of view at sustainable transport. And particularly around highways improvements as well. If we were looking at a garden village, for example, at Hare Green and one at Wheelie, then the road between those two places is the key consideration from a transport point of view. Of course, there are going to be other impacts on nearby villages that we picked up through other studies and other work on the local plan review. But purely from a transport perspective, the impact from new garden villages are going to be on that key road network rather than on the villages to the north of the A120. Railways, again, is something that has been picked up through this work, and like they've done with buses, they've also done quite an in-depth analysis of current situation with rail travel and identified whether there are certain developments that might lift demand for additional rail services. And of course, we're at a time where the local rail provider is looking to be nationalised in the coming months, and so whether that has an impact on the strategy and the services that are delivered as well. But our consultants are very aware of that at a local level, but also at a regional level as well. They work on this evidence across Essex, and so they have the contacts with the right partners to be able to engage them at the right time, to understand where rail services can be improved, but also where stations and the sort of the surrounding area and the impacts on traffic can be improved as well. I missed one point about leaving from Great Bentley and turning left towards Freighting or right towards Wheelie. And that's something that I had quite an interesting conversation with someone at the Brightlingsea exhibition about, and they explained to me that if you try to leave Great Bentley during rush hour, it's much easier to turn left because the traffic on the main road is going so slowly, you can easily get out. But if you go in less peak times, the traffic coming along there is so fast that it can be very difficult to turn out of those villages onto the main road. And that isn't a problem that's been raised explicitly through our modelling so far, but it is something we want to look at, particularly if we're looking at additional growth at Great Bentley, possibly at sort of Little Bentley as well. We'll want to ensure that access into those villages is suitable, that it's safe. And so it's something we'll be looking at, but I'm not sure what the sort of mitigation or what the impacts there would be just yet. The point about residents wanting to downsize and to free up sort of family homes is a really important one. And there are different approaches that can be taken. There's sort of a school of thought that mixed communities are beneficial. And so having a new development that has family homes and homes suitable for retirement living as well is the right approach to take, and having that mixture in one development. Other people prefer the sort of the quieter lifestyle of having a small development of retirement bungalows. And so that's something that we really want to encourage through the local plan. And we need to look at sort of what the most appropriate policy approach is there, whether we mandate particular percentage of new homes to be for retirement living, whether we make sure the policy framework is there to really support those kind of communities in the right locations. And you'll know that sort of through neighbourhood plans, it's a really effective way to identify that local need. So in Alresford, for example, there are proposals for that kind of accommodation that accords with their neighbourhood plan. But yeah, that's something that we're considering, very much picked up through the SHMA and we'll be looking at sort of the most appropriate way to either allocate land to encourage that kind of development through policy.
Come back.
Mr Woods, thank you for your, I know there's a lot of questions, Chairman, but thank you, Mr Woods, for coming back. There was a really good response on all of them. Thank you.
Councillor Cossins next.
Right. Mine's on transport as well. I think some of the explanation might be on 45, but I want to understand how we would choose other more advanced transport modelling scenarios to go forward, because I think, you know, we've got a list of sort of 10 possibilities that we're looking at, but I would like to know maybe how, for instance, you know, the A120 corridor, I mean, one end is an international port, the other end is an international airport, effectively, and that will form the spine road of our new unitary authority, in effect. So that's quite a key thing there. But then perhaps, you know, transport isn't so sustainable there. But I would like to understand how we're going to choose advanced modelling, because I mean, one of the things put forward for say a garden village at Hare Green, I used to know it as a different site, but one of the positives put forward for that was it created a north-south sort of link turn, and it actually then took off it took out lorries and vehicles travelling maybe from Clacton to Harwich using the 1414 corridor. And I think, you know, I would like to see how doing something in one place might impact on another proposal, because I think that was one of the benefits of the Hare Green thing, was that it may take heavy lorries off that corridor, because I think we're talking Little Clacton to Great Oakley, but you might say, you know, Clacton almost to Harwich like that. And of course that crosses a junction where we're talking about Thorpe High Street, but that junction that forms part of that corridor is the junction that blocks up, you know, partly due to Thorpe High Street, but partly just due to the volume of traffic that's travelling down there. And I think then that, of course, then impacts on 10. But how will we select interactions between one or two options and see how it actually might bring better outcomes or worse outcomes with two interacting with the others? Because we won't be able to model everything, but, you know, how are we going to select things that we may want to do advanced models on?
Paul?
Thank you, Councillor Cossins. Yeah, as I explained earlier, and I tried to communicate through the report, that the work we've had done so far is a very initial stage of transport work. It's very much an iterative process, and so this is a high-level analysis of some of the pros and cons, if you like, of the 4 options that we consulted on. But it's absolutely the case that the next stage will be a much more detailed technical modelling of specific development sites. And so the work that my team's doing at the moment is to plot all of the sites that have been submitted to us into a computer GIS system, geographical system, so that those sites can be sent to our consultants, loaded directly into their model with information about the number of new homes, the exact boundaries of the sites, and begin to model the interaction of new development across the district. Not only new sites that we're proposing through the local plan review, but also sites that are already in the pipeline. So those sites that have been allocated in the current local plan, those sites that have got planning permission, they will all be put into